On the coldest night of her life, a single mother opens her door to a stranger, only to realize it's Keanu Reeves, soaked, desperate, and hiding from something terrifying. Why was he at her doorstep, and what secret was powerful enough to change both their lives forever? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The night air was colder than usual for Los Angeles. Street lights buzzed above the sidewalk, casting pale yellow halos on the concrete, but none of them seemed to reach the little figure huddled against the studio's tall iron gates. 11-year-old Hazel Ward pulled the sleeves of her oversized hoodie tighter around her thin arms, trying to keep in whatever warmth was left. Her sneakers were worn through at the toes, her jeans frayed, but she stood there anyway, refusing to move. Clutched between her small hands was a piece of cardboard cut from a discarded box. Across it, written in thick black marker, were the words she had practiced in the dim glow of the hospital bathroom light: "Please help my mama." The letters were uneven, the ink smudged by her trembling fingers, but they were bold enough for anyone to read. Hazel lifted the sign each time she heard footsteps or the roar of a passing car. Most people didn't notice. Some glanced quickly, then looked away, pretending she wasn't there. A few muttered something under their breath before rushing on, but Hazel didn't flinch. She kept her eyes steady, determined, almost defiant. Her mama always told her that sometimes hope comes to the people who refuse to let go, even when the world tells them to. Hazel clung to that hope now, because without it, she had nothing left. It had been 3 days since she first took her spot at the studio gates. She had counted them carefully. 3 days of sunrise to sunset, of sneaking sips of water from a nearby fountain, of nibbling on the granola bar Officer Ramirez, the kind security guard, had slipped her when nobody was looking. 3 nights of curling up on the pavement, hugging her backpack, tight against her chest as the city buzzed around her. She hadn't left because leaving meant giving up, and Hazel Ward was not ready to give up. Inside the studio walls was the man she had been waiting for. She had memorized the schedule, heard whispers from crew members who passed by. His car came and went through those gates. His face appeared on posters plastered along the street. His name echoed in interviews Mama used to watch late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Keanu Reeves. To most, he was a movie star. To Hazel, he was something more. Her last chance. Her mama was running out of time. The doctors had said it plainly, their voices hushed but not soft enough. Without surgery, both she and the baby inside her wouldn't survive. The cost? $50,000. Hazel had felt the number like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. It wasn't a number she could understand, not really. It was bigger than anything she had ever held. Bigger than the sky. Bigger than the distance between the hospital bed and the parking lot where she and Mama had been sleeping in their old car. 50,000 might as well have been $1 million. But Hazel believed in miracles. She believed in stories where good people showed up when it mattered most. She had seen clips of Keanu Reeves stopping to help strangers, of him listening when nobody else would. Mama had once whispered through cracked lips, "If anyone would care, it would be him." And Hazel had believed her. So here she was, shivering under the city lights, clutching a cardboard sign with all her strength. Each passing minute gnawed at her. Each hour stretched her thin, but she refused to sit down completely. She wanted to be standing when he arrived. She wanted him to see her eyes first, the fear inside them, but also the fire. Her body was tired, her voice hoarse from whispering the same plea over and over. But Hazel Ward would not go home, because home no longer existed. Home was a sterile hospital room with machines that beeped and wires that wrapped around her mother's fragile arms. Home was the sound of a nurse saying, "We need a decision soon." Home was the place where Mama's breathing grew weaker every night, where Hazel curled beside her on the narrow bed and listened to her heartbeat like a countdown. Hazel lifted the sign higher, forcing her arms to stop shaking. "Please help my mama," she mouthed again, her lips dry, her throat burning. And still, no one looked long enough to see her. But she waited, because waiting was all she had left. The storm did not ease, it only grew worse. Hazel pressed her forehead against the chilled window pane, her breath fogging the glass. Rain pounded with an angry rhythm, as if the sky itself wanted to break into her small apartment. A flicker of lightning cut across the street, illuminating the drenched figure still standing there, unmoving, as if rooted to the spot. Her chest tightened. Every instinct screamed that she should close the curtains and walk away. After all, she had learned the hard way that strangers brought trouble. Her ex had been a stranger once, charming words, a warm smile, until his true nature surfaced and left her scarred. She had a son to think about now. Liam was sleeping just down the hall, his tiny body curled under a blanket with faded rocket ships. He depended on her. She couldn't risk letting danger into their fragile home. Yet, as another flash lit the night, she caught a glimpse of the man's face. His expression wasn't threatening. It was desperate. There was a hollowness in his eyes that mirrored her own during her darkest nights, when bills piled higher than she could pay, and she cried quietly, so Liam wouldn't hear. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering though the heater buzzed weakly in the corner. What was he doing out there in this weather? Who was he running from? Or running to? Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the thin walls, and instinctively Hazel pulled the curtain shut. The room plunged back into the soft glow of candlelight. She tried to breathe steadily, to tell herself it wasn't her problem. People passed through this neighborhood all the time. Maybe he was just lost, maybe drunk, maybe worse. But her heart wouldn't quiet. Something deep inside whispered that fate had pushed this man onto her street for a reason. She'd always told Liam that kindness was a light in dark places. Wasn't she betraying her own words if she pretended not to see him now? The minutes dragged. Each raindrop against the glass felt like a knock against her conscience. She pressed her palms to her temples, torn between fear and compassion. Then, in the corner of her eye, movement. The man staggered, his body swaying dangerously close to collapse. Hazel's pulse jumped. He was going to fall, right there on the empty road, in the storm that showed no mercy. Her breath caught. Memories surged of a night long ago when she herself had nearly collapsed outside a supermarket, clutching Liam in her arms, weak from hunger and exhaustion. A stranger had given her a grocery bag and a smile, small gestures that had saved her. That memory pierced through the fog of doubt. She couldn't ignore him, not now. Hazel stepped away from the window, her decision weighing heavy but resolute. The rain still hammered, the storm still roared, but her mind was clear. She whispered under her breath, almost like a vow to herself, "I won't let him fall." With trembling hands, she reached for the door. Hazel's hand lingered on the doorknob, the wood damp beneath her trembling palm. The stranger outside hadn't moved, only shifted his weight as if bracing against both the storm and the world beyond it. For a heartbeat, the thunder ceased, leaving only the ragged sound of his breathing. Something in it, a quiet plea, raw and unguarded, unlocked her hesitation. She pulled the door wider. "Come inside," she whispered, the words fragile yet firm. He hesitated, eyes scanning the shadows of the street before meeting hers again. A flicker of gratitude crossed his face, though he still carried a wariness that unsettled her. Finally, he stepped over the threshold, dripping water onto the faded rug she'd bought secondhand years ago. Hazel shut the door quickly, sealing them away from the storm. The sudden quiet of her small apartment wrapped around them, fragile and tense. Candlelight painted the man's features in trembling gold, revealing lines of exhaustion carved deep into his face. Hazel felt her breath catch, recognition dawning in an impossible rush. The man standing in her living room, shivering and broken, was none other than Keanu Reeves, and he looked like he was carrying the weight of a secret that could shatter everything. Hazel's arms ached from holding the cardboard sign so high, but she refused to lower it. She was certain down to the very core of her being that every second counted. Somewhere beyond those gates was the one person who could change everything. She imagined his kind eyes glancing her way, imagined him rolling down the car window and saying, "Tell me what's wrong, kid." That hope was the only thing keeping her upright. But her fragile shield of determination cracked when heavy footsteps approached. A familiar voice followed, firm but not unkind. "You can't stay here, kid." Hazel turned. Officer Ramirez loomed just a few feet away, flashlight beam cutting through the early dawn mist. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a trimmed mustache and the weary look of a man who had spent too many nights watching over these gates. He had told her the same thing the day before and the day before that. His tone wasn't cruel. It carried more of a sigh than a scold, but the words still struck her like a slap. Her throat tightened. "Please, sir. I'm not hurting anyone." She held the sign higher even though her arms trembled. "I just need to see Mr. Reeves, please." Officer Ramirez rubbed his temple, glancing back at the silent studio gates. The world behind them was worth billions, but on this side of the fence was a child, with scuffed shoes and hollow cheeks, begging like her life depended on it. And from the look in her eyes, he suspected it did. "Hazel," he crouched a little, trying to soften his voice. "I told you yesterday and the day before, you can't be standing here like this. It's not safe and it's not allowed. People come and go, important people, and if they see you, well, they'll ask me why I let you stay." Hazel's lips quivered, but she didn't step back. "I just need to see him once, just once. He helps people. I saw it on TV. Mama says he's different. He listens. If I can tell him what's happening, maybe he'll help." The officer's chest ached at the sound of her voice, the way it cracked on the word mama. He had 2 kids of his own, one Hazel's age, one younger. He knew the look of a child carrying more weight than her shoulders were built for. It wasn't fair. Kids should be worrying about school projects and soccer games, not life-or-death surgeries. "Look, Hazel," he sighed, running a hand down his jaw. "You can't keep skipping meals just to stand here. Where's your mother? Someone must be looking for you." Hazel's eyes dropped to her battered backpack at her feet. She hesitated, biting her lip, before slowly unzipping the front pocket. From inside, she pulled out a folded photograph. Creased, smudged, but still sharp enough to tell the story. She held it out with trembling fingers. Officer Ramirez hesitated, then took it. The moment he looked at the image, his heart sank. The photo showed a woman lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Her face was pale, nearly gray, with tubes pressed against her nose and IV lines taped to her thin arms. But it wasn't just the fragile stillness of her features that struck him. It was the unmistakable swell of her belly. She was heavily pregnant. Officer Ramirez exhaled slowly, the weight of the picture pressing into his palm. He looked back at Hazel, who was hugging her arms across her chest, bracing for his reaction. "That's my mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They said she and the baby will die if they don't get the surgery. $50,000, sir. We don't have it, but maybe he does. Maybe Mr. Reeves will listen." Hazel's heart pounded louder than the storm outside. She gripped the edge of the blanket, her knuckles white, straining her ears. The knocking didn't stop. It came again, deliberate this time, like someone who knew she was inside. Her first instinct was fear. Living alone with her little boy meant being cautious, sometimes overly so. She whispered, under her breath, "Please let it be nothing. Maybe the wind?" But deep down, she knew the difference. The knock was human, intentional. For a moment, Hazel considered ignoring it, pretending she wasn't home. But another thought pulled her in the opposite direction. What if it was someone in real trouble? The storm was merciless, thrashing the world outside with icy rain and wind that howled like a warning. If a person was stranded out there, they could freeze before morning. She stood, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like armor, and tiptoed toward the door. The apartment was small, so it took only a few cautious steps. Each creak of the floor seemed louder than thunder. Hazel's breath fogged in the cold air as she pressed her eye to the peephole. At first, she saw nothing, just the distorted blur of rain slashing across the dimly lit hallway. Then, a shadow moved. A figure leaned heavily against the wall, head bowed, body trembling. Hazel squinted, trying to make sense of what she saw. Whoever it was looked broken, exhausted, her stomach twisted. Should she open the door? The rational part of her screamed, no. She had a child to protect, and inviting a stranger inside during a storm sounded like the beginning of every cautionary tale. Yet something about the figure outside felt different. Not threatening, but vulnerable. The knocking came once more, softer this time, almost like a plea. Hazel's pulse raced. She glanced back at her son's bedroom door, cracked open just enough for her to hear his gentle breathing. One wrong choice could put him in danger. But what if turning away meant leaving another human being to suffer? She rested her forehead against the door, her mind in turmoil. Memories of her own struggles flooded back. Nights when she had felt invisible, desperate, praying someone would show kindness. Could she really deny that to another soul now? Hazel's hand trembled as it hovered over the lock. She whispered to herself, just one look, just to see. With a shaky breath, she began to turn the knob. But before she could pull the door open, lightning flashed outside, illuminating the hallway for an instant. The brief burst of light revealed the man's face, drenched, pale, eyes wide with something that wasn't just fear. It was the look of someone carrying a secret, something heavy enough to crush them. Hazel gasped, stumbling back from the door. She had no idea that the decision she was about to make, whether to open it or not, would change her life and her son's forever. Hazel shut the window tight and pulled her cardigan closer around her. She tried to shake off the unease, but it lingered like a shadow. Every creak of the floorboards, every howl of the wind outside made her turn her head sharply. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't quite name it. Maya, ever perceptive, noticed her mother's silence. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think he's okay? The man outside?" Hazel forced a small smile. "He'll find somewhere warm, sweetheart. Don't you worry." But inside, she wasn't convinced. She remembered the way he had stopped under the flickering street lamp, not moving for a long while, as though deciding whether to vanish into the darkness or stay put. The candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, making their little apartment look smaller than ever. Hazel set another log on the fire, though she hesitated. Wood was precious, and she needed it to last. But the thought of the storm intensifying and the strangers still out there gnawed at her conscience. She glanced at the window one last time before tucking Maya into bed. The silhouette was gone. For a moment she felt relief, but it was mixed with something heavier, an ache of uncertainty. Hazel blew out the last candle and whispered a prayer into the silence. She didn't know then that the choice she wrestled with, the choice of helping or turning away, would soon return to her in a way that would alter her life forever. And outside, in the relentless rain, the stranger was still there, only now he wasn't alone. The morning dragged into late afternoon, and Hazel's small frame seemed almost lost against the towering studio gates. Her arms ached from holding the cardboard sign, her throat raw from whispering the same plea under her breath. Officer Ramirez had walked past her more times than he could count, sometimes shaking his head, sometimes pretending not to notice. Though his eyes betrayed how deeply it troubled him, still she stayed, her resolve carved sharper with each hour. Then, just as the sun began to dip low, casting the street in orange light, a familiar sound cut through the murmur of traffic. The low, steady growl of an engine. Hazel froze. She knew that sound. She had memorized it in her head, imagined it for nights. Slowly, around the corner, a sleek black car appeared. Her chest tightened. The license plate. She had seen it before. Seen it often enough to know it wasn't a dream. Her knees wobbled, but determination carried her forward. Hazel dropped the cardboard sign and sprinted, weaving between startled pedestrians, her hair whipping across her face. Officer Ramirez shouted behind her, "Hazel, stop!" But she didn't hear him, or maybe she didn't want to. Nothing mattered now except the car. The security guard stepped forward, alarm in their eyes as the girl darted past. But Hazel didn't slow down. She ran until her palm slammed against the cool tinted window of the black car. Her breaths came in ragged bursts, fogging the glass, her tears streaking her cheeks. She banged her fists against the window, voice cracking as it burst free. "Please, Mr. Reeves, please save my mama. I'll work for you forever. I'll do anything. Just don't let her die." The guards rushed, hands outstretched to pull her away, but in that moment, the world seemed to pause. The car didn't speed off. The engine hummed, steady and waiting. And then, slowly, with a soft mechanical whir, the tinted window began to slide down. Hazel froze, her fists pressed still against the glass, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Inch by inch, the window lowered until at last she could see him. The man inside leaned forward slightly, his face etched with quiet lines of weariness, his dark eyes calm but heavy with a lifetime of unseen battles. To Hazel, he was more than the star on posters, more than the legend whispered about in the streets. In that moment, he was simply human. Their eyes met. For a second, Hazel thought she might collapse under the weight of it. But then his voice, low and gentle, steadied her trembling world. "What's your name?" Hazel's lips trembled, her breath hitching. "Hazel? Hazel Ward. My mama is dying, please." She reached into her backpack with desperate hands, pulling out the folded photograph. She held it up against the open window, her tears smearing the edges. "This is her. Please, she doesn't have much time." Keanu Reeves looked at the picture. The moment his gaze landed on it, his expression shifted. His face went pale, his jaw tightening as though struck by something invisible yet devastating. His hand, resting on the leather seat, trembled. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he leaned back, his breath catching. For the first time in years, Keanu Reeves looked as though the ground beneath him had vanished. Hazel's small apartment, though modest, became a fragile refuge against the howling storm outside. The walls trembled under the weight of the wind, and the flickering candlelight threw trembling shadows across the cracked plaster. She had not planned for visitors, certainly not for this man. Yet here he was, dripping onto her worn rug, his dark hair plastered against his forehead, his chest rising and falling with the strain of someone who had been running far too long. Hazel stared, heart pounding. For a moment she thought exhaustion was playing tricks on her. She blinked once, twice, but the face before her didn't vanish. Keanu Reeves. The actor whose face she had seen on posters, on television, in films she once watched on nights she wanted to forget her loneliness. It didn't make sense. Why would he be here, of all places? Why in the rain, at her door? "Sit," she managed to whisper, though her voice shook. Her instincts as a mother, as someone who had learned to survive storms both inside and out, told her that whoever he was in the world outside, here in her apartment, he was simply a man in need. Keanu hesitated, glancing toward the door as if the shadows beyond it carried danger. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into the chair by her small table. His hands trembled as he reached up to push the wet hair from his eyes. He didn't speak at first, and Hazel didn't push. She only placed a mug of warm water in front of him, the best she could offer in the moment. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice soft, almost hoarse. It was the first sound he'd made since stepping inside. Hazel caught the weariness buried in it, the weight of something he wasn't ready to reveal. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm battering the windows. Hazel sat opposite him, pulling her thin cardigan tighter. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why was he running? Why did he look over his shoulder like that? Why here? But her life had taught her patience, and patience was what she gave. Finally, Keanu's eyes lifted, catching hers in the wavering glow of the candle. For a moment, she saw more than the man from the movies. She saw fear and loneliness, and a vulnerability that mirrored her own. It unsettled her, yet it also made her feel less alone. Hazel's daughter stirred in the bedroom, coughing lightly in her sleep. The sound drew Keanu's attention. His expression softened, though his shoulders remained tense. "You're not alone," he said quietly, as if it were both an observation and a reassurance to himself. Hazel nodded, her throat tightening. "No, not alone." The storm outside roared louder, rattling the glass as though to remind them both how fragile this moment of shelter was. Hazel knew something had shifted. Her home, once a silent cocoon, now held a man whose presence carried secrets. She didn't yet know what they were, but she sensed one thing with certainty. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm he had brought with him. Hazel's hands trembled as she set down the flickering candle between them, its flame casting shifting patterns across Keanu's worn face. The storm outside raged, but inside her tiny apartment, time felt suspended. She studied him, uncertain whether to ask the questions burning inside her or remain silent. Keanu's breathing was uneven, his shoulders tense as though he expected someone to burst through the door at any moment. He finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you. I just needed somewhere to disappear." Hazel swallowed hard, torn between fear and instinct. He wasn't just any stranger. He was Keanu Reeves. But the vulnerability in his eyes was startling, almost childlike. He wasn't a superstar right now. He was just a man running from something. "Disappear from who?" she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Keanu hesitated. His gaze shifted to the rain-lashed window, as though the storm itself carried secrets. "From people who don't see me. They see what I can give them, what they can take." His voice cracked, heavy with exhaustion. "But not who I really am." The words sank into Hazel like stones in water. She had lived that reality too, people dismissing her worth, seeing only what they wanted. For the first time in years, she felt seen, even in silence. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, two souls sat across from each other, bound by shared loneliness neither expected. Hazel realized that whatever had led Keanu to her door, it wasn't an accident. It was fate, carried in on the storm. The crowd around the studio gates buzzed with confusion as Hazel pressed the photograph closer to the car window. Keanu's hand lifted slowly, almost involuntarily, taking the picture from her trembling fingers. He stared at it, his breath shallow, the world narrowing to the pale, fragile woman in the image, his silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. Hazel's chest heaved as though the weight of all her days on the sidewalk were finally crashing down on her at once. She pressed her palms to the glass, desperate. "Please, Mr. Reeves, she's all I have. If she goes, I'll have no one. The doctor said the baby won't make it either. They need the money before they'll even try. $50,000. I tried to raise it, I swear, but..." Her voice broke into hiccuping sobs. The guards reached for her arms again, trying to pull her away from the vehicle, but Keanu's voice stopped them. "Wait." The word was soft, but it carried weight. He pushed the car door open and stepped into the light, the late sun casting a glow across his weary features. The crowd gasped. People nearby fumbled for phones, trying to capture the moment, but Keanu ignored them. He dropped to one knee so that his eyes were level with Hazel's. She stood frozen, her cheeks wet, her knuckles white as she clutched her bag. His voice was gentle, almost like a whisper meant only for her. "How long has your mother been in the hospital?" Hazel blinked at him, disbelief flickering across her face. He wasn't dismissing her, he wasn't walking away. He was asking, really asking. And once the door to her pain cracked open, the words rushed out like floodwater. 2 weeks, she blurted, her voice trembling. It started with headaches, then her feet swelled so bad she couldn't walk. Then she collapsed. They said her blood pressure was too high, that it was dangerous for the baby. We called an ambulance, but we didn't even have money for that. They took her anyway. She's been hooked up to machines since then. Her words tumbled faster, her chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. We used to live in a little apartment, but when Mama couldn't work anymore, we lost it. We lived in our car for a while. But when she collapsed, I pushed her inside the hospital, and I told them they couldn't let her die, not with the baby, not with my brother. Hazel swallowed hard, her lips trembling. They did the tests, and the doctor said the surgery could save her, but it costs $50,000. They won't do it until we can pay. Her eyes widened, the desperation in them raw and unfiltered. I don't have anyone else. I don't have family. Mama said you were different, that you cared about people, that if I waited, you'd listen. Keanu's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping back to the photograph. His thumb brushed across the image, tracing the outline of the woman's weary face. Something in his chest clenched, a memory stirred, half-buried, fragile, but persistent. He looked up at Hazel again, his breath catching. There was something hauntingly familiar about the woman in that photo. Hazel sat on the edge of the couch, her knees drawn together, hands twisting in her lap. Across from her, Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his thighs, the flickering candlelight pulling sharp shadows across his face. For a man who had been on countless screens larger than life, here he seemed startlingly human, fragile, like the storm outside had stripped away everything but his raw truth. "You must think I'm out of my mind," he murmured, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low, unsteady, yet carrying that same quiet strength she had seen in movies. Hazel shook her head. "I don't know what to think. You show up at my door in the middle of a storm and I still don't even know why." He looked at her then, a long, searching glance that seemed to weigh her soul. "Because you didn't slam the door. Because you said, 'Come inside,' when you could have turned away." Her breath caught. It wasn't an answer, not really, but it felt like one. The candle sputtered in its glass holder, and Hazel found herself staring at it, as if the flame could steady her own nerves. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" she asked softly. Keanu leaned back, running a hand through his wet hair, his expression unreadable. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to be somewhere nobody expected me to be." Hazel frowned. "You could be anywhere. A hotel, a friend's house. Why here? Why me?" For the first time he smiled, a small, weary smile that barely reached his eyes. "Because sometimes the safest place is the one no one would ever look for. And tonight, that's here. With you." Her pulse quickened. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something in his tone, equal parts gratitude and desperation, made her stop. Instead, she nodded slowly, accepting that whatever brought him here wasn't simple. "All right," she whispered, "then stay, just don't expect me not to have questions." Keanu chuckled softly, the sound rough, almost broken. "Questions are fair." He reached for the mug of tea she had set on the table earlier, now lukewarm, and cradled it in his hands as though the act itself gave him strength. The storm boomed outside, rattling the windows. Hazel glanced toward her son's closed bedroom door, praying he wouldn't wake up. The last thing she wanted was for Jacob to stumble into the living room and see a stranger. No, not a stranger. Keanu Reeves, sitting there dripping rainwater on their old carpet. Keanu noticed her glance and followed it with his eyes. "You have a child," he said softly. Hazel stiffened, then nodded. "Jacob, he's 8. He's sleeping." Something flickered across Keanu's face. Pain, longing, maybe both. He lowered his gaze to the tea and murmured, "You're braver than I am. Raising him on your own?" Her throat tightened. "How do you know I'm on my own?" He hesitated, then looked back at her with a kind of gentle certainty. "Because you opened the door yourself. Because you didn't call out for anyone else. Because I've seen that strength before." Hazel swallowed hard. His words pierced deeper than she expected. She wanted to tell him everything, the loneliness, the exhaustion, the nights she lay awake wondering if she was enough. But she stayed quiet. Instead, she simply asked, "And what about you? What are you running from?" Keanu exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the world pressed down on him. "Not running," he said at last, "searching for something real, for someone who doesn't see me as the man on the screen." Hazel's chest tightened, the storm outside suddenly echoing the storm inside her heart. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just sheltering a stranger. She was sheltering a man stripped of everything but truth. And somehow, that scared her even more. Hazel sat down slowly, the old couch sagging beneath her weight, and pressed a hand over her chest. Her heart still hammered, but now it wasn't just from the storm or the sudden encounter. It was from the quiet realization that she had let a complete stranger into her home. No, not just a stranger, but Keanu Reeves. The man the world adored, the man she'd only ever seen on movie screens or charity headlines, was here in her tiny apartment, dripping water onto the worn carpet. Before he could answer, Keanu lowered himself onto the chair across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the rain filled the silence, steady and relentless. Then, with a voice softer than she expected, he broke it. "You saved me," he said simply. "I was out there, nowhere to go, no idea who to trust. And you—" He looked around, eyes landing on the cracked walls, the flickering light. "You opened your door." Hazel's throat tightened. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to tell him she wasn't anyone special. She was just a single mom trying to stretch every dollar, just someone holding herself together. But in his words there was no mockery, only gratitude. "You don't even know me," he added, "and yet you risked this." Hazel finally found her voice. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone. Sometimes you just feel it." Their eyes met. For the first time that night, the storm outside seemed to lessen. Inside that room, between two people who should never have crossed paths, something fragile yet undeniable had begun. An unspoken bond, carved out of rain, fear, and a choice to trust. Hazel didn't know where this would lead, but she knew one thing: nothing in her life would ever be the same. The drive to the hospital felt like a blur. Hazel sat pressed against the passenger seat, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles blanched white. She kept glancing at Keanu, as though afraid he might vanish, as though this might all dissolve into a cruel dream. His profile was lit by the glow of passing streetlights, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the road with a determination she couldn't name. The car was sleek and quiet, but inside it, silence weighed heavy. Hazel's chest heaved with each breath, her heart pounding faster the closer they came to the building that held her world. She wanted to fill the silence, to thank him, to ask why he had looked so shaken by her mother's photograph. But the words tangled inside her. Instead, she whispered a single line, half to herself, half to him. Please let her still be alive. Keanu's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His knuckles whitened against the leather, as though he were bracing himself. He didn't answer her aloud, but inside, something twisted hard. He told himself to stay steady, to focus only on getting the girl safely there. But the image of the woman in the photo refused to leave his mind. The hospital's pale glow rose ahead of them, its windows flickering under fluorescent light, a beacon both hopeful and cold. When Keanu pulled into the lot, Hazel was out of the car before it fully stopped, her small frame darting toward the sliding doors with a speed born of desperation. He hurried after her, his long strides catching up quickly, though his chest felt heavier with each step. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and fear, the kind of sterile sharpness that clung to every corner of hospitals. Machines beeped somewhere distant. A nurse looked up at Hazel in surprise as she rushed past the reception desk. "Hazel, slow down," the woman called. But Hazel was already pushing through the corridors, weaving as though she had memorized each turn. Keanu followed in silence. People glanced at him, some whispering his name, but their voices blurred into meaningless noise. His focus stayed locked on the girl's small figure ahead. At last, Hazel stopped in front of a door. Her breathing was ragged, her small hand pressed flat against the glass. Beyond it, faintly visible through the curtain, was the outline of a woman on a bed. Hazel swallowed hard, then turned the handle. The room was dim, the steady rhythm of machines filling the silence. Pale fluorescent light flickered above, illuminating the fragile figure lying motionless. Lydia Ward lay with her hair damp against her forehead, her skin nearly translucent, wires and tubes webbing around her body. Her swollen belly rose faintly beneath the hospital blanket. She looked impossibly fragile, as though one wrong touch might break her. Hazel's eyes filled instantly. She rushed to her mother's side, clutching her limp hand, whispering fiercely, "Mama, I'm back. I brought him. You're not alone." Keanu stepped inside, but the moment his gaze landed fully on Lydia, his body locked. His breath left him in a sharp exhale. His lips parted, and before he could stop himself, the words slipped out, broken and raw. "It can't be." Hazel sat frozen, her lips parted, eyes fixed on him. The flickering candlelight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw and the tension in his expression. She had only asked a question out of instinct, never expecting such a reply. "You're Keanu Reeves?" Her voice broke on the words. Keanu sighed softly, lowering his head, as though even acknowledging his name was a burden. "Yes, but tonight that doesn't matter. Please, just think of me as someone who needed a door to open." Hazel's heart pounded. She had seen his face on movie posters, glimpsed his interviews on TV, and overheard coworkers gushing about his kindness. But seeing him here, soaked, trembling, and painfully human, stripped away the mystique of fame. He wasn't untouchable. He was vulnerable. "I don't understand," she whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. "Why were you out there, alone like that?" He looked up, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Because sometimes even people you think have everything have nowhere to go." The words sank into her chest like stones. She wanted to ask more, but his sincerity silenced her. It wasn't an act. It wasn't a line from a film. It was raw truth. Hazel swallowed hard. "Then you should know. You're safe here. My home isn't much, but it's dry and it's warm. That's all I can offer." For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. That's more than most people would give. The storm outside roared louder, wind rattling the window. Hazel stood and fetched an old quilt from her bedroom. When she returned, Keanu hadn't moved, his head bowed, hands clasped as though in prayer. She draped the quilt over his shoulders, her fingertips brushing against his damp shirt. He flinched slightly, then relaxed, letting the warmth sink into him. "Thank you," he murmured. Hazel sat across from him again, the tiny apartment cocooned in candlelight and storm song. She couldn't reconcile the man before her with the legend she'd known from afar. And yet, this version of Keanu, exhausted, grateful, quietly broken, felt more real than any role he had ever played. She leaned forward, her voice trembling but steady. "You don't have to explain tonight, but if you ever want to talk, I'll listen." Keanu met her eyes, and for a moment Hazel swore she saw a flicker of relief, as if her words had given him permission to simply exist. He nodded once. "I'll remember that." The storm raged on, but inside, a fragile peace had begun to form. Two strangers, bound not by fame or circumstance, but by the simple grace of shelter in the darkest of nights. Hazel studied him in silence, watching how his eyes shifted toward the window, as if the storm wasn't the only thing outside that unsettled him. It was the look of a man who had lived too long with ghosts trailing behind him, and for a moment she forgot he was Keanu Reeves, the actor whose face had been on movie posters and magazine covers. Here, in her modest kitchen, he wasn't untouchable. He was human. "I didn't mean to drag all of this into your home," Keanu finally murmured, his voice heavy with restraint. "But sometimes the weight of the past doesn't let you stay quiet forever." Hazel leaned against the counter, arms folded, though her heart softened. "You don't owe me explanations, but if you need to talk, storms are good for that. Nobody can hear except the walls." He almost smiled. "And the walls don't judge?" "Not unless they're moldy," she quipped, surprising even herself. The small joke cut through the heaviness, and Keanu chuckled, low and genuine. It felt like the sound of something cracking open, a locked door within him. Slowly his expression shifted. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers intertwined as if bracing himself. "There's someone I lost, someone I can't stop thinking about. Nights like this, when the world feels too loud, her absence is louder. And I wonder if maybe the storm is just reminding me she's gone." Hazel's throat tightened. She didn't ask who, whether it was family, a friend, or a love long buried. It didn't matter. Grief had only one language, and she spoke it too. The candlelight flickered, shadows brushing his face as if painting his sorrow, and Hazel, against all reason, felt her own walls crumbling. Because beneath the storm, beneath the mystery, was a man as lost and searching as she was. She reached across the table, her hand pausing inches from his. "Then maybe tonight," she whispered. "You don't have to carry it alone." The silence that followed was louder than thunder. The hospital room was thick with silence, broken only by the faint, steady beeping of the monitors. Hazel sat, clutching her mother's limp hand, whispering words of comfort that fell on deaf ears. Keanu stood frozen in the doorway, his body taut, eyes fixed on Lydia, as though the sight of her had dragged him into another time, another place. His lips parted, but no words came. The door opened with a hush, and Dr. Williams entered, his expression solemn, his white coat rustling softly. He carried a clipboard but didn't glance at it, his eyes already taking in the scene, the frail woman, the terrified girl, and the man whose presence carried a weight few could understand. He drew in a breath, then approached the bed, lowering his voice. "I'm Dr. Williams. I've been caring for your mother, Hazel," he said gently, kneeling so his eyes met hers. His tone carried the careful precision of a man used to breaking terrible news, but also the compassion of one who hated to deliver it. "I need to be honest with you. Your mother is very, very sick." Hazel's grip tightened on Lydia's hand. "But she'll get better, right? You can fix her." Dr. Williams hesitated, his expression pained. "Your mother has severe preeclampsia. It's a complication of pregnancy. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. Her organs are under strain. Without surgery, both she and the baby will die. The words hit Hazel like a blade. Her head shook violently, her eyes filling with desperate tears. No, you don't understand. She's strong. She told me she'd make it. The doctor raised a calming hand, his voice quiet but firm. Hazel, listen. She may be strong, but her body is failing. We've done everything we can to stabilize her, but time is running out. If we don't operate within the next 24 hours, we will lose them both. Hazel crumpled forward, her forehead pressing against her mother's hand as sobs racked her small body. The words felt unreal, impossible, like the world itself had betrayed her. Keanu's chest tightened painfully as he watched, his fists curling at his sides. He wanted to step forward, to do something, anything, but for a long moment, he was frozen. The sight of Hazel clinging to her mother's failing body tore through him with a force he hadn't felt in years. At last, his voice cut through the grief-filled room, quiet but steady. If surgery can save them, then do it. Dr. Williams's eyes flicked to him, uncertain. It's not that simple. The surgery is complicated and expensive. We require whatever it costs, Keanu interrupted, his voice sharper now, every syllable resolute. I'll cover everything. Money isn't the issue. Just do it. Please. Hazel's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face wide-eyed, trembling. You mean it? Keanu nodded slowly, stepping closer, his gaze locked on hers. Yes, I promise you, Hazel. Your mother and your baby brother will have a chance. I'll make sure of it. Hazel leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on Keanu. She couldn't help it. The quiet storm inside him drew her in, pulling at her curiosity and her heart. You don't have to tell me, she said gently. But if you want to, I'll listen. Keanu's gaze flickered toward her, the weight of her sincerity making the silence heavier. For a long time, only the hum of the storm filled the room. Then he took a slow breath, the kind of breath that comes before unraveling something long kept inside. I've spent years living in shadows, he began, his voice rough yet steady. People think they know me, the movies, the interviews, the red carpets. But that's not real life. Real life is what happens when the cameras leave. His fingers tightened around the cup of tea. And in real life, I've lost more than I've kept. Hazel's chest ached at his words. She didn't need details to understand loss. She knew it intimately. Keanu continued, his voice lower now, almost fragile. I had people I thought I'd grow old with. People who made me believe in forever. But forever didn't come. I buried too many dreams along the way. And sometimes, his voice faltered and he looked away. Sometimes I wonder if I've been running ever since. From pain, from myself, from everything. Hazel wanted to reach out, but she kept her hands clasped tightly, giving him space. And tonight? She asked softly. Were you running? If I had run, the state could do as much. Are you far? Yes. His eyes lifted, meeting hers with a haunting vulnerability. Yes, but not from fame, not from fans, not even from the storm outside. I was running from silence, from the loneliness that follows me everywhere I go. Her breath caught. Hazel understood that loneliness like a mirror of her own. The small apartment, the long nights, the quiet after her daughter was asleep. It was a silence that gnawed at her, too. Without thinking, she whispered, You don't have to run anymore, not here. The words surprised even her, but they landed between them with the weight of truth. Keanu blinked as if startled by her openness, and something in his expression softened. An unspoken gratitude, a fragile trust beginning to form in the dim light of her living room. The storm outside had softened to a steady drizzle, but inside Hazel's apartment, the tension only thickened. The candle between them flickered against Keanu's features, casting shifting shadows across his tired, weathered face. Hazel leaned forward, her elbows resting on the scarred wooden table, as if anchoring herself for whatever truth was about to spill from him. Keanu drew in a deep breath, his hands clasped together as though in prayer. "Hazel, I need you to understand something. I didn't just happen to knock on your door tonight. I wasn't lost, and I wasn't simply looking for shelter. I came here because I was being followed." Her stomach clenched. The word "followed" pierced through the fragile calm of the room. She glanced toward the window instinctively, half expecting to see shadows moving against the glass. "By who?" she whispered. Keanu's eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted slowly to meet hers. "Men I used to know. People who don't forgive. I thought I left all of that behind, but sometimes the past has a way of finding you." Hazel's breath hitched. The man across from her wasn't just an actor, a face from magazine covers and movies. He was a person caught in something much larger, much darker than she had imagined. "Why here? Why me?" she asked, her voice tight. "Because you opened the door," Keanu said softly. "Because in that moment, when I was out there soaked and desperate, you didn't turn away. And maybe I needed to trust that someone in this world still would." The word struck her harder than she expected. Her hand tightened around her tea mug, as though it could ground her against the swirl of emotions rising in her chest. She had lived her entire life with people turning away from her struggles, from her exhaustion, from the quiet battles she waged as a single mother. And here was Keanu Reeves, a man the whole world admired, saying he had felt the same kind of abandonment. Hazel's throat tightened. "Keanu, if what you're saying is true, if someone is after you, then you can't stay here, not with Lily asleep in the next room." "I know," he admitted quickly, his voice laced with guilt. "I shouldn't have come, but I was out of options. I thought I could keep moving, stay ahead of them, but tonight, the storm broke me down. I needed somewhere, anywhere." Her heart hammered as she wrestled with fear and compassion. Every instinct told her to protect her daughter first, to shield Lily from any danger, but another voice, quieter, steadier, reminded her of what she saw when she first opened that door. A man not of power and fame, but of brokenness. A man who looked as lost as she often felt. She pushed her chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the floor. "You're asking me to risk everything," she said, her voice trembling. "No," Keanu shook his head, eyes burning with sincerity. "I'm not asking, I'm confessing. You deserve the truth before I disappear again. I'll be gone before dawn, if that's what it takes. I'll never put you and your little girl in danger, but I couldn't leave without you knowing why I came." Hazel stared at him, torn in two. On one side stood the raw instinct to shield Lily, to close the door on all of this chaos. On the other side stood the rare and aching recognition of someone carrying invisible wounds, someone reaching for kindness in a world that so often withheld it. The candle sputtered, throwing the room into brief darkness before catching flame again. Hazel felt the choice forming in her chest. Maybe letting him leave would be safer. But maybe, just maybe, the storm had pushed him to her door for a reason neither of them fully understood. The hallway outside the operating room was a blur of frantic motion, nurses pushing carts, the squeak of rubber soles against tile, the low hum of monitors and alarms. Hazel stumbled along beside the gurney as the orderlies wheeled her mother toward emergency surgery, her small hand clutching Lydia's pale arm. "Mama, hold on," Hazel cried, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave me." Lydia's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, her lips moving weakly. Hazel leaned closer, straining to catch the words. "The letter, Keanu." Her mother's frail hand twitched toward the worn purse slung against the side of the gurney. Before Hazel could ask, Lydia's strength failed again. Her eyes rolled back, Her body went limp, and the machine screamed louder as the team rushed her through the double doors. Hazel collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands, tears spilling freely. Keanu hovered nearby, his heart in his throat, watching the woman vanish behind the sterile doors. His chest felt like it was caving in, but his gaze drifted toward the purse Hazel still clutched against her chest. She looked up at him, eyes red, cheeks streaked. She said, "Something about a letter." Her voice shook. "Do you think she meant in here?" Keanu swallowed hard, nodding. "May I?" His voice was low, reverent, as if even asking was a trespass. Hazel hesitated, then placed the worn leather purse into his hands. It was old, the stitching fraying, the zipper barely holding on. He unfastened it carefully, almost afraid of what he might find. Inside were a few essentials: a half-empty wallet, a rosary, a small photograph of Hazel as a toddler, and then, tucked deep inside, his fingers brushed something stiff. He drew out an envelope, its edges yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was deliberate, careful, almost trembling in its precision. For Keanu Reeves. "If something happens to me." The words blurred as his heart hammered. His hands shook violently, his breath shallow. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. Hazel tilted her head, confusion creasing her face. "Why would Mama write something to you?" Keanu couldn't speak. His chest constricted so tightly he thought he might collapse. He lowered himself into a chair, the envelope trembling in his grip. With painstaking care, he slid a finger under the flap and broke the seal. The paper inside was folded neatly, fragile with time. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first line. His pulse roared in his ears as the words came into focus, written in Lydia Ward's careful script. "Keanu, if you are reading this, then fate has decided for us." His breath caught. Each line seemed to tighten the air around him, every sentence dragging him deeper into a past he thought long buried. Hazel couldn't sit still. The apartment was too small for her racing thoughts. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the window against the wind seemed louder than it should have been. Keanu had gone quiet, his face unreadable as he stared at the rain dripping down the glass. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're not telling me everything." Her voice was steady, though her chest felt tight. Keanu turned to her, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, weariness, passing over his features. "I don't want to drag you into this." Hazel crossed her arms. "It's a little late for that. You're in my home, hiding from someone, and whoever it is, they clearly scare you. If I'm already in danger, I deserve the truth." Her words hung in the air. Keanu inhaled slowly, like he was deciding whether he could trust her with something that might change her world forever. His hand rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous gesture that looked almost boyish despite the heaviness of the moment. "They're not just after me," he said finally. "They're after anyone who helps me, anyone connected to me." His gaze lingered on her, heavy with meaning. Hazel's heartbeat thudded harder. The thought of her name, her address, her little apartment being known by dangerous people made her stomach twist. She thought of her son asleep in the bedroom, blissfully unaware of the storm raging, both outside and inside their walls. "You should have told me that from the start," she whispered, her throat dry. "I know," Keanu admitted, lowering his eyes. "But once you knew, you'd have a choice to make. Stay in it with me, or walk away before it's too late." Hazel felt her hands tremble at her sides. It wasn't fair. Why should she have to make a choice like this, between safety and whatever strange sense of loyalty had already begun to bind her to this man? But deep down, she realized something unsettling. She already knew her answer. Hazel stared at Keanu across the dimly lit apartment, her hands curled tightly around the chipped ceramic mug she hadn't even touched. The tea inside had gone cold long ago, but her pulse still thundered, as if she were standing in the middle of a battlefield rather than a quiet room in a rundown building. Keanu's voice echoed in her head, words heavy with urgency. "They're not after me. They're after you." For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. The idea was absurd. She was just a single mother who worked 2 jobs, whose greatest battle most days was keeping her son fed and the rent paid. Who in the world would want to come after her? But the seriousness in his face told her this wasn't paranoia, and it wasn't some passing storm of danger that would blow over if she ignored it. "You don't understand," she whispered finally, her throat dry. "I'm nobody. Why would anyone?" "Because of what you have," Keanu cut in gently but firmly. His eyes softened with something that looked like both fear and compassion. "Hazel, the night you let me in, you thought you were just helping a stranger. But I wasn't lost. I was being watched, followed. They've been tracking anyone connected to me, anyone who shows kindness. That includes you." Her stomach dropped. "But that doesn't make sense." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his drenched hair now dried in uneven strands. He looked exhausted, older somehow, yet every word carried a weight that made Hazel feel like she was suddenly in a story far larger than the confines of her life. "They think you're holding something," he said. "Information. Proof. Something that was meant for me but could expose them if it's in the wrong hands." Hazel shook her head, the mug rattling in her grip. "I don't have anything, I swear. I'm just trying to raise my son." Her voice cracked. "That's all I've ever been doing." For the first time, Keanu's expression broke into something vulnerable, even apologetic. "I know, and that's what terrifies me. You didn't choose this, Hazel. But the night you opened your door, you stepped into a storm you couldn't see. They'll twist it. They'll come after you. Because it's easier than coming after me directly?" The walls seemed to close in around her. She remembered every strange shadow near the grocery store, every flicker of movement at the bus stop that had made her glance twice. Had it all been leading here? Her breath came fast, and suddenly tears blurred her vision. "So what do I do? What am I supposed to do, Keanu? Run forever? Hide? I have a child. I can't." Keanu reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. His touch was steady, grounding, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a flicker of calm. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "That's why I'm here, to make sure they never reach you, to make sure your son stays safe. I've been in storms before, Hazel, but I've never seen anyone face one as bravely as you did that night. You chose compassion when most would have closed the door. Now, I need you to keep choosing courage." Her tears slid silently down her face as she stared at him, the magnitude of his words pressing into her chest. She hadn't thought of herself as brave, not once. She'd thought of herself as desperate, as tired, as clinging to survival. But maybe that choice in the rain had been something more. Maybe it had been the first step into a fight she never asked for, but one she couldn't run from now. Hazel finally nodded, her voice trembling but steady. "Okay. Tell me what I need to do." Keanu's lips pressed into a thin line, half grim, half grateful. "First," he said, "you need to know the truth about who we're up against, and why they won't stop." The storm outside pounded harder against the windows, thunder rattling the glass. Hazel realized her world had just split open. Everything she thought was safe was gone. But across from her sat a man who had carried storms far heavier than hers, and in his presence she felt something she hadn't in years. And with that fragile hope, Hazel braced herself for the truth that would change everything. Keanu sat frozen in the hard plastic chair, the letter trembling in his hands. The words swam before his eyes, though he had read them twice already. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the rhythmic beeping of machines down the hall. drowning out the hushed voices of nurses. Lydia's handwriting, delicate yet deliberate, seemed to pull him backward in time, back to nights when laughter had been enough to keep the darkness at bay. Back to fleeting moments he thought had been lost forever. Hazel leaned forward, her knees nearly touching his. She had never seen a grown man look like that before. Haunted, shaken to the core. Her young voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Reeves, what does it say?" Keanu looked up slowly, his gaze falling on her face with new weight. In the trembling fluorescent light, every detail struck him anew. The stubborn tilt of her chin, the way her dark hair fell into her eyes, the quiet strength in her small frame. Details he had overlooked, details that suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Hazel." His voice cracked and he had to stop, forcing himself to breathe before he continued. "Do you know much about your mother's life before you were born?" Hazel frowned. "Not really. She never talked about it. She just said she had me, and that was enough." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why? Do you know my daddy?" The question hit him like a blade. He closed his eyes for a long moment, Lydia's words flashing in his mind. "I never told you. I couldn't. You had a life, and I didn't want to burden you. But Hazel is yours. She deserves to know if I'm not here to tell her." His hand shook as he lowered the letter to his lap. When he opened his eyes again, they glistened. "Hazel," he faltered again, his throat tightening. Finally, he whispered, "I think I might be your father." For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Hazel's breath caught, her small chest rising and falling in sharp bursts. She stared at him, her eyes wide, confusion and shock crashing together. "You're my daddy?" she repeated, almost in disbelief, as though the words themselves were too heavy to carry. Keanu's face twisted with guilt and awe all at once. "I didn't know, Hazel. I swear to you, I didn't know. Your mother never told me. If I had known..." His voice cracked again, and he shook his head, unable to finish. Hazel's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "But all this time I thought I didn't have one. I thought he left us. I thought maybe he didn't want me." Her voice broke, small and raw. "Was it you all along?" Keanu leaned forward, his hands trembling as he reached across the space between them. "No, Hazel, no. I never left you. I never abandoned you. If I had known, I would have been here. Every single day. Please, believe me." Her lips trembled as her gaze searched his, desperate for truth. For the first time in her life, she saw not the actor, not the face on posters, but a man who looked as lost as she felt. Then, "You're really my daddy?" she whispered. "Yeah." Keanu's throat tightened as he nodded slowly, painfully. "Yes, Hazel, I believe I am." Hazel sat in silence for a moment, the air heavy with the rawness of Keanu's confession. Her heart ached for him. This man, who the world adored for his talent and humility, carried wounds that fame could never heal. "You know," she said gently, "when my husband left, I thought it was because of me. Like maybe I wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not strong enough, not lovable enough. I carried that lie for years." Keanu turned his eyes toward her, the flicker of the candlelight catching the wetness still gathered at the corners. "And now?" he asked, voice low, cautious, as though he wasn't sure he deserved to know the answer. Hazel gave a sad smile. "Now I know it was his choice, his weakness, his mistake. But the hardest part was realizing that his mistake didn't have to become mine. I didn't have to let it define me or my son." The words seemed to hang in the room, soft but powerful. Hazel reached for her cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly, as she wrapped them around the warmth. Ethan still asks about his father sometimes. I want to tell him the truth, that his father ran, but I don't. I tell him his dad couldn't stay, but that he is still loved, because I don't want him growing up thinking he's broken. Keanu's expression tightened. That's what I felt. Broken, like something inside me was unworthy of being fought for. His hand clenched into a fist before relaxing again. It's strange, isn't it? How children carry burdens that should never have been theirs to carry. Hazel nodded, her eyes welling. Yes, and sometimes we repeat those mistakes without even meaning to. I worry every day. What if I fail Ethan? What if I push him away like his father did? Her voice cracked, the fear spilling out, raw and unfiltered. Keanu leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His tone shifted, carrying a rare steadiness. Hazel, listen to me. You haven't failed him. You're here. You stayed. That already makes you the opposite of the man who left. The certainty in his voice cut through her doubts like sunlight breaking clouds. For the first time in a long while, Hazel allowed herself to believe it might be true. And you, she whispered, almost in disbelief. You stayed too. You didn't have to. You could have walked away after the storm, but you didn't. Keanu looked at her then, something unspoken shimmering between them. A recognition, a fragile kinship born out of pain, but strengthened by resilience. The wind outside rattled the windows, but inside the small apartment, there was a stillness. Not of emptiness, but of understanding. Two souls, scarred in different ways, finding a strange kind of healing in each other's presence. Hazel breathed deeply, her chest lighter than it had been in years. For once, the mistakes of the past didn't feel like chains. They felt like lessons. Harsh ones, yes, but perhaps leading toward something more. The hours dragged on like lifetimes. Hazel sat curled in a chair outside the operating room, her knees pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Every time the doors swung open, she looked up, only to see strangers, nurses with hurried steps, doctors consulting charts. Her stomach twisted tighter with each passing minute. Beside her, Keanu paced back and forth, his hands buried in his jacket pockets, his face taut with worry. His usual calm demeanor had cracked. Every so often, his lips moved soundlessly, as if in prayer. He had faced stages, cameras, whole worlds watching him, but never had he felt as helpless as he did waiting for news of Lydia and the child he now knew was bound to him by blood. Finally, the doors opened and Dr. Williams stepped out, pulling down his mask. His eyes were tired, but there was a softness in them that hadn't been there before. Hazel shot to her feet, her whole body trembling. Is Mama? Is the baby? The doctor held up a hand gently, his voice steady. Both survived the surgery. It was close, closer than I'd like, but your mother pulled through. She's resting now. The baby is premature but breathing on his own. We'll keep him under observation, but right now, he's fighting. Hazel's knees buckled with relief. A sob tore out of her and she covered her face with her hands, crying openly, the dam of fear finally breaking. Keanu caught her by the shoulders, steadying her before she could collapse completely. She turned into him without thinking, clutching his shirt as tears soaked the fabric. They're alive, she whispered, over and over, as though saying it would make it real. They're alive. Keanu closed his eyes, his hand resting gently against the back of her head. Yes, he murmured, his voice husky. They're alive. Dr. Williams cleared his throat softly. Please, would you like to meet your brother? Hazel's head jerked up, her tear-stained cheeks streaked with hope. Can I? Of course, the doctor said. He's small, but he's strong. Come with me. Hazel released Keanu reluctantly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Together, they followed the doctor down the corridor, past rooms filled with fragile cries and quiet machines. At last, they entered a small neonatal room where an incubator sat under soft light. Inside, wrapped in a tiny blanket, lay a baby boy. His skin was pink and delicate, his breaths quick but steady, his tiny fists clenched, as though ready to fight the world. Hazel pressed her hands to the glass, her eyes wide with wonder. "He's so small," she whispered. "Smaller than I thought a baby could be." Dr. Williams smiled faintly. "But strong. He's a fighter, just like his mother, just like his sister." Hazel's throat tightened at the words. She turned to Keanu, who stood silently at her side, his gaze locked on the fragile child before them. In that moment, something in his expression shifted, something raw, something fierce. Hazel looked back at the baby, her voice trembling. "What's his name?" The doctor shrugged lightly. "Your mother didn't tell us before she went under? Do you have one in mind?" Hazel's lips curved softly. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled page, one she had written on during long nights by her mother's hospital bed. She smoothed it with shaking hands. "Mama said if it was a boy, she wanted to name him Elias. It means, 'The Lord is my God.' She said it gave her strength." She pressed her forehead lightly to the glass. "Hi, Elias," she whispered. "I'm your big sister." Keanu swallowed hard, his chest constricting as he watched Hazel's fragile form beside the incubator, her hand resting against the glass, as if promising the tiny life inside that he was not alone. Hazel sat on the edge of the couch, her hands gripping the blanket so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Across from her, Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his face etched with the kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical. The storm outside had quieted into a steady drizzle, but inside, the air was charged with the weight of everything left unsaid. "You don't have to tell me if it's too much," Hazel whispered, her voice trembling, "but I can see it in your eyes. You're not just hiding from the rain." Keanu let out a long breath, his gaze falling to the floor. For a moment, Hazel thought he might stay silent, that he'd retreat back into that stoic quietness she had seen when he first arrived at her door, but then he lifted his head, and the vulnerability in his eyes was sharper than any storm. "You're right," he said quietly. "I wasn't just running from the weather." He paused, gathering the strength to continue. Hazel leaned closer, sensing how much it cost him to peel back the layers he had built over years of silence and solitude. "I've spent my whole life carrying other people's stories. Fans, journalists, strangers. They all want to see something in me, some perfect version of who they think Keanu Reeves is. But I've never really let anyone see the truth." His voice faltered. "Because the truth is, I'm still haunted by everything I lost." Hazel's throat tightened. She had read about his tragedies, but hearing him speak them aloud, raw and unfiltered, was different. "My father left when I was a boy. My best friend River died before he even got to live his full life. I lost the woman I loved. I lost our child." His voice cracked and he pressed a hand to his face. "And I kept going, because the world expected me to. But inside, I've been drowning." The room seemed to shrink around them. Hazel's eyes blurred with tears. She wanted to reach out to comfort him, but she stayed still, letting him have the space to unburden what had clearly been locked away for years. "I thought tonight, when I walked into the storm, maybe it would wash me clean," Keanu continued. "Maybe it would just carry me away, and I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. But then you called me inside." Hazel's heart pounded. She realized now that his presence at her door wasn't random. It was fate, pulling two broken souls together. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she said, her voice firm despite her tears. "Not in this house. Not with me." For the first time since arriving, Keanu's face softened. His eyes glistened, and though no words came, the silence spoke everything. Outside, the rain began to fade, leaving only the echo of two lives colliding in the most unexpected of storms. The sterile quiet of the hospital room was broken only by the soft hiss of oxygen and the faint whir of machines. Keanu sat in a chair by Lydia's bedside, baby Elias cradled carefully in his arms. The tiny boy stirred, his breaths uneven but steady, his fists curling instinctively around Keanu's finger. Keanu watched him with awe, the weight of fragile new life pressing into his chest. Hazel sat nearby, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but shining with wonder. She leaned close, her hand resting gently on the edge of the blanket. "He looks so peaceful," she whispered, almost afraid to disturb the quiet miracle in front of her. Keanu nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere, flashing back to Lydia's letter, to the words that had shattered and remade his world in a single breath. "Hazel is yours." The truth weighed on him like both a gift and a wound. He didn't know how to carry it, not yet. A faint sound drew his attention. Lydia stirred against the pillows, her eyelids fluttering, her lips parting. Hazel jumped to her feet, rushing to her mother's side. "Mama, you're awake!" Lydia's eyes blinked open slowly, clouded with exhaustion, but then sharpened as they settled on the scene before her. Her gaze landed on Keanu, holding the newborn child, and tears filled her eyes almost instantly. Her lips trembled, and she raised a frail hand as though reaching for something she had long ago given up hope of touching. "I thought," her voice rasped, weak but clear enough, "I thought I'd never get the chance to tell you." Her gaze flicked from Keanu to Hazel and back again. "Hazel is yours." The words hung heavy in the air, though Keanu had already known them from the letter. Hearing them aloud from Lydia's lips was like a final blow, and a long-deoed absolution all at once. Hazel gasped, her wide eyes darting between them. "Mama, you mean he really is?" Lydia nodded, her tears slipping down her pale cheeks. "Yes, baby. He's your father." Keanu felt his throat close, his chest burning. He swallowed hard, shifting Elias gently into the bassinet before rising to his feet. He stared down at Lydia, his voice rough with years of grief, anger, and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Hazel froze, torn between her mother's fragile form and the raw anguish in Keanu's voice. Lydia lowered her gaze, shame flickering in her tired eyes. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Afraid of what it would mean for you, afraid of what it would mean for her. You were drowning in your own losses, Keanu. Your world had already fallen apart. I couldn't bring more pain into it. I thought protecting you from the truth was the kindest thing I could do." Keanu's hands clenched at his sides. "Protect me? Lydia, you kept me from my own daughter. You kept her from knowing she had a father who would have moved heaven and earth for her. You should have trusted me." Lydia winced, tears streaking her cheeks. I know now, but back then I was proud and scared and so very alone. I thought I could handle it. I told myself Hazel would be enough, that she didn't need anyone else. But every day I saw her grow, and every day I saw you in her eyes, I knew I'd stolen something precious from both of you." Keanu's voice broke, raw with anguish. "You should have told me. I missed her whole childhood. I missed years I can never get back." Lydia reached weakly for his hand, her grip faint but insistent. "But you're here now. That's what matters." The next morning, Keanu arrived at a community center downtown where he had quietly sponsored programs for underprivileged families for years. Normally, the visits were low-key, away from the cameras, but this time, dozens of reporters and photographers were already waiting outside. Word had spread that Keanu was expected to make a statement, and anticipation hung thick in the summer air. He walked through the doors without his usual dark sunglasses, his expression open but weary. The children inside ran to him, hugging his legs, unbothered by the storm swirling outside. That small moment reminded him why he was doing this. Not for gossip, not for the headlines, but for the lives affected by what people chose to believe. When Keanu finally stepped onto the small stage, the noise of cameras clicking filled the room. He paused, scanning the crowd, as if searching for the right words. Instead of beginning with denial, he spoke about something deeper. "I know the past week has been loud," he began, his voice steady. "Stories have been written, opinions shared, and judgments made. But before I answer to those things, let me remind you why we're here. This community center feeds children who would otherwise go hungry. It gives single parents, like my own mother once was, the support they need to keep going. That's where my heart is, and where it will remain." The crowd grew quiet. Even the most cynical journalists lowered their pens for a moment, caught off guard by his direction. "Now," Keanu continued, "about the stories? Yes, I saw my ex. After 10 years, life gave us a moment of honesty and reconciliation. That was not a scandal, it was human. We spoke of forgiveness, of the mistakes we made, and of the way forward. If that conversation has value, it is in showing that healing is possible even after years of silence." He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice softening. "I ask you, please, to treat that moment not as entertainment, but as what it truly was. Two people choosing peace instead of bitterness. We live in a world where anger spreads faster than kindness. But I believe we can change that, and I believe stories of grace matter more than stories of division." Applause rose unexpectedly from the back of the room. It wasn't staged. It came from the families who had gathered, people who knew his quiet generosity long before the cameras. The journalists, almost reluctantly, joined in. Keanu stepped back, his eyes glistening. He hadn't just defended himself. He had turned a tabloid frenzy into a call for compassion. And though he knew the headlines would twist some of his words, he also knew that a seed of truth had been planted, one that might change the narrative. The hospital room was cloaked in the soft hum of machines and the pale glow of early dawn filtering through half-closed blinds. Lydia lay propped against the pillows, her body frail but her eyes awake and sharp, glistening with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Hazel was curled on the chair at her bedside, still holding her hand, unwilling to let go even for a moment. Keanu sat on the other side, his jaw taut, his gaze heavy, as though bracing himself for whatever truth Lydia had yet to speak. It was Lydia who broke the silence. Her voice was rough but steady. "There's more I need to tell you. You both deserve to know." Hazel looked up, her brows knitting together. "Mama, you don't have to, not now. You just came out of surgery." Lydia gave a faint smile, her hand squeezing Hazel's gently. "If not now, then when? I've carried this secret for too long, and the weight of it nearly destroyed me. You deserve to know what happened, why our lives turned the way they did." Her gaze shifted to Keanu, lingering with a mixture of regret and unspoken apology. "You especially." Keanu leaned forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. "Then tell me, Lydia. Tell us both." Lydia drew in a shaky breath, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling as if summoning the courage to revisit a wound she had long tried to bury. "When I was younger, before Hazel was born, I was working in the industry. I wasn't an actress, not really. I wrote scripts, concepts, outlines. I had a voice, and for a little while people listened. I thought maybe I had a chance." Her eyes hardened, shadows passing through them. "Then I met Victor Hale." Keanu's body stiffened, his fists curling instinctively at the sound of the name. Hazel tilted her head in confusion. "Who's Victor Hale?" Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line. "A producer. Powerful, connected. The kind of man people don't say no to because he can make or break careers with a single phone call. She shivered, her voice thick with bitterness. I thought he believed in me. He said my ideas were fresh, that I had potential, but instead of mentoring me, he stole from me. My words, my stories, entire scripts. I'd see them twisted, polished, and sold under his name or someone else's while I was left with nothing. Hazel gasped softly, squeezing her mother's hand. That's awful. Lydia nodded, her expression tightening. When I confronted him, he laughed, told me no one would believe a nobody like me over him. And when I pushed harder, he threatened me, said if I didn't shut up, he'd make sure I never worked again. Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. And then I got pregnant. With you, Hazel. Word spread faster than I could imagine. I was young, unmarried, and suddenly I wasn't just dismissed. I was blacklisted. Every door slammed shut in my face. My calls stopped being returned. My name was whispered with contempt. It was as if I had been erased. Keanu's hands clenched tighter, his jaw locking. He knew Victor Hale, knew the slick charm, the false grin that hid rot underneath. He had crossed paths with the man at industry parties, had always felt the sliminess beneath his surface. But hearing Lydia's story confirmed everything he had ever suspected. Victor Hale, Keanu muttered, his voice low, dangerous. He's still thriving, still parading around Hollywood like he owns it all. I should have known. Lydia turned her face toward him, her eyes heavy with sorrow. He destroyed me, Keanu. Not just my career, but my hope, my sense of worth. I told myself I had to be strong for Hazel, but the weight of what he did, it pushed me into a darkness I couldn't climb out of. Hazel's grip tightened, her voice small but fierce. Mama, you're still here. He didn't win. Tears slid down Lydia's cheeks as she pressed her lips to Hazel's hair. Only because of you, my love. You kept me alive when I didn't think I could go on. Keanu rose slowly to his feet, his chest heaving with the fury he could no longer contain. Victor Hale will not get away with this, not anymore. The morning after Keanu's public plea, the air felt heavier, filled with both relief and uncertainty. For days, the media had painted a narrative of betrayal, secrecy, and scandal, but now the world was watching to see if there could be redemption. Keanu, however, wasn't thinking about headlines or trending hashtags. His mind was set on something far more fragile: trust. He knew that rebuilding it would not be achieved with one speech or a viral clip. Words could soothe, but only consistent actions could heal. That morning, he reached out to Claire with a quiet message. I don't want to just explain anymore. I want to show you. When they met again, it was at a small cafe far from the glare of cameras. Claire sat across from him, her eyes searching for sincerity in the silence between them. Keanu didn't rush into explanations. Instead, he listened. Claire spoke of the years she had spent raising Emily, of the struggles and the choices she had made to protect her daughter's innocence. She confessed the resentment she had carried, but also the fear that Keanu's sudden involvement might upend the life she had carefully built. Keanu absorbed every word, not with defensiveness, but with humility. He admitted his faults, not only for the mistakes of the past, but for the silence that had stretched too long. He told her he didn't want to erase her sacrifices or overshadow her role. He wanted to honor them, to walk alongside her instead of rewriting the story she had carried on her shoulders. The cafe buzzed with the normal rhythm of clinking cups and murmured conversations, but for the two of them, it felt like the world had narrowed to a single fragile moment. When Claire finally leaned back, her eyes softened, not with full forgiveness yet, but with the first glimmer of trust returning. If you're serious, then you'll need to prove it. Not to me, but to her, she said. Keanu nodded. He didn't hesitate, because he understood. This wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up every day, about consistency, about presence. And it started with Emily. That evening, Keanu sat with Emily in the quiet of Claire's living room. He didn't bring cameras, didn't bring his fame, didn't bring rehearsed words. He brought only himself. Together, they pieced together a simple puzzle on the coffee table. At first, Emily's laughter was hesitant, as though she wasn't sure if she was allowed to let him in. But as minutes stretched into hours, her laughter grew freer, and her trust began to take root in the smallest of ways. An extra puzzle piece handed to him, a quick glance filled with curiosity. A smile she didn't hide. For Keanu, this was the start of something greater than reconciliation. It was the beginning of a life rebuilt, not by repairing what was broken, but by creating something new, steady and whole. The hospital lights dimmed as night settled, casting long shadows across the room. Hazel had dozed off in the chair beside her mother's bed, her hand still clutching Lydia's fingers as though afraid to let go. Keanu stood near the window, staring out at the city, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. For the first time in years, he felt as if the world he thought he understood had tilted into a new axis. Lydia, Hazel, Elias. Suddenly, they weren't just names in his orbit. They were his anchor. Behind him, Lydia stirred. Her voice was weak but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Keanu, there's something else you need to know. He turned instantly, moving closer, his expression tense. What is it? She swallowed, her eyes flicking toward Hazel before locking on to him. Victor Hale didn't just ruin my career. He left a trail. Documents, contracts, records of the money he funneled and the ideas he stole. I kept them. I knew one day the truth would matter, even if it couldn't save me. Keanu's brow furrowed, his voice dropping. You have proof? Lydia nodded faintly, her breaths shallow but determined. Yes. Emails, signed papers, drafts with my name on them, before he stripped it away. Financial records showing he profited from scripts he claimed as his own. Enough to expose him, if someone has the courage to use it. The weight of her words settled over the room like a stone. For years, Victor Hale had been untouchable, his reputation shielded by money and power. But this was a crack in his armor. Where is it? Keanu asked, his voice edged with urgency. Lydia's lips trembled as she whispered, in our old apartment, behind a loose floorboard in the bedroom closet. I couldn't take it with me when we left. It was too dangerous. If anyone found out, she closed her eyes, her body trembling with the memory. I told myself I would go back for it, but I never could. Fear kept me away. Hazel stirred at the sound of their voices. She blinked awake, rubbing her eyes, her gaze darting between them. What's going on? Keanu hesitated, but Lydia squeezed Hazel's hand. Sweetheart, remember the closet in our old place? The one where the floor squeaked? Hazel frowned, her memory sparking. Yeah, the one I used to hide in when the landlord came knocking? Lydia smiled faintly despite the heaviness of the moment. That's the one. Under the back corner there's a board that lifts. Something's hidden there. Something that can finally stop Victor Hale. Hazel's eyes widened with dawning realization. I know where it is. I can help. Keanu's chest tightened at the determination in her voice. She was young, but she carried a resilience far beyond her years. He glanced at Lydia, who nodded faintly, then looked back at Hazel. We'll go together, he said firmly. All of us. This time, he won't win. For the first time since the storm began, the three of them, Lydia, Hazel, and Keanu, shared a vow unspoken, yet unbreakable. They would face the darkness together. And this time, they would not run. The volunteers worked tirelessly, but the clock was against them. The dolphin's breathing had become shallow, its movements weaker by the minute. Keanu crouched lower, keeping his hand gently over its side as if willing it to fight. For a man who had faced so many battles of the heart, This fragile life suddenly carried the weight of all his regrets. He whispered softly, not to the crowd, not even to Claire, but to the dolphin itself. "Hold on, you're not done yet." Claire knelt beside him, her eyes shimmering with urgency. "Keanu, the rescue team is delayed. We may not make it in time." Her voice cracked, carrying the pain of helplessness. For a brief second, she looked not like his distant ex, but the woman he had once held through sleepless nights. The woman who had taught him to believe in second chances. That recognition jolted him into action. "No," Keanu said firmly, his tone steadier than anyone expected. "We won't lose it. Not here, not now." He reached for the bucket of water, motioning for the volunteers to continue pouring rhythmically across the dolphin's skin. "We keep it alive until they arrive, whatever it takes." The crowd, moved by his unwavering determination, seemed to find new strength. A young boy stepped forward, offering his own beach towel, and others quickly followed. Soon, a chain of hands stretched along the sand, each person carrying water, wrapping cloth, or shielding the animal from the relentless sun. It wasn't just Keanu fighting for the dolphin anymore. It was an entire community bound by a fragile thread of hope. Claire leaned closer, her hair brushing against Keanu's shoulder as they worked in unison. For the first time in a decade, their movements were synchronized, unspoken and seamless, as if time had never separated them. She pressed her palm against the dolphin's fin, whispering, "Stay with us, beautiful one. You're stronger than this." Keanu glanced at her, and in that fleeting moment, their shared plea for life bridged the years of silence between them. Minutes dragged like hours. The dolphin let out a weak, plaintive cry, and many in the crowd turned their faces away, bracing for the worst. But Keanu refused to falter. He bent low, pressing his forehead gently against the animal's sleek skin. "You've got oceans to swim, places to see. Don't give up." His words were simple, but they carried the force of a man who had lost too much already. Then, against all odds, the dolphin shuddered, releasing a burst of air that sounded like a defiant breath of survival. Gasps erupted across the beach, followed by cries of joy. The rescue boat appeared on the horizon at last, racing toward them with sirens blaring. Relief swept through the crowd like a breaking wave, but Keanu didn't move until he felt the dolphins breathing steady again beneath his palm. Only then did he rise, exhaustion etched into his features, but his eyes alive with gratitude. Claire touched his arm gently. "You gave it a chance," she whispered. "You never stopped believing." And in that moment, surrounded by strangers united in compassion, Keanu realized that saving the dolphin was more than an act of mercy. It was a reflection of the healing still possible between him and the woman beside him. The hospital once felt like a sanctuary, its humming machines and sterile halls separating them from the chaos of the world outside. But by morning, that illusion shattered. The moment Keanu stepped into the corridor with Hazel at his side, a tidal wave of flashing cameras and shouted questions crashed against them. Security guards strained to hold back the paparazzi pressing against the hospital's sliding doors. "Keanu, is it true?" one shouted. "Did you father a secret child? Is this woman conning you?" another demanded. "People say she's been living in shelters, lying for money." Hazel flinched, clutching Keanu's hand tighter. The flashes of cameras reflected in her tear-bright eyes, each click of the shutter feeling like an invasion. She had never faced such a crowd before. She buried her face against his arm, trembling, as strangers screamed accusations she couldn't even fully understand. By the time they made it back into Lydia's room, Hazel was pale, her small shoulders hunched, as though she carried the weight of every ugly word spoken outside. Lydia, still weak, looked up in alarm. "What happened?" Keanu's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, the screen already flooded with headlines. "Keanu Reeves fooled by homeless woman?" Another read, "Is Lydia Ward a scammer exploiting a Hollywood star?" Dozens of others followed, each uglier than the last. The photographs splashed across the articles were merciless. Hazel clutching a cardboard sign outside the studio, Lydia lying in her hospital bed. Keanu's face caught mid-action, like a man already defeated. Hazel peeked at the screen before Keanu could hide it. Her breath caught. "They're calling Mama a liar," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're saying she made it all up." Lydia reached weakly for her daughter's hand, her eyes glassy with tears. She tried to fight back. "Hazel, don't listen to them." But Hazel pulled away, her chest heaving. "But it's everywhere. Everyone's saying it. What if they're right? What if no one believes us?" Her voice broke into sobs. "What if Mama gets taken away? What if they hate us?" Keanu knelt in front of her, his large hands steadying her trembling shoulders. His eyes were fierce now, no longer weary but ablaze with determination. "Listen to me, Hazel. They're wrong, every single one of them. And you know why? Because we have the truth, and when the truth comes out, it won't matter what lies Victor Hale throws at us." Hazel sniffled, staring into his unwavering gaze. "But how do we prove it?" Keanu's voice dropped, calm but strong. "We show them the evidence. Your mama was brave enough to keep it safe all these years. Now we use it. No more hiding, no more running." For the first time since the headlines hit, Hazel's tears slowed. She clung to Keanu, her small frame pressed against his chest, as if she could draw strength from the certainty in his voice. "Promise," she whispered. Keanu's arms tightened around her. "I promise, Hazel. We'll show them the truth. And when we do, no one will ever call your mama a liar again." The island air was thick with salt and silence. The only sounds were the rhythmic crash of waves and the rustle of palm leaves swaying in the breeze. Keanu stood with Anna at the edge of the water, both staring at the horizon, their shadows stretching long against the fading sun. For a long time, neither spoke. The weight of unspoken years pressed heavily between them, yet the ocean seemed to invite honesty. Anna finally broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder what might have been?" Her voice trembled, not from the sea air, but from the question itself. Keanu's gaze didn't shift from the water. "Every day," he admitted. His words carried no bitterness, only a deep sadness that time hadn't erased. The honesty startled her, and she looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. "You never showed it. You always looked like you had moved on, like Hollywood and fame had filled the space I left behind." He turned then, meeting her eyes with a rawness she hadn't seen before. "Fame doesn't fill anything. It just makes the emptiness louder." Her breath caught. In that single moment, the years apart collapsed, and she saw not the celebrity the world adored, but the man she had once known. Vulnerable, searching, and quietly aching. They walked along the shoreline, the sand cool beneath their feet. With each step, memories resurfaced. Late-night drives, whispered promises, the quiet mornings when they believed nothing could touch them. And yet, as real as those memories were, the scars of what followed lingered too. Anna stopped walking and faced him. "I loved you, Keanu, more than I ever thought possible. But when things got hard, I didn't know how to hold on. I thought leaving was the only way to survive." Her confession was sharp, like reopening an old wound, but Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if he had rehearsed hearing those words 1,000 times in his mind. "I don't blame you," he said softly. "We were both broken in our own ways. I buried myself in work, in movies, in anything that kept me from feeling. You chose to run. Maybe neither of us knew how to fight for what we had." The admission hung between them, fragile yet freeing. A seagull cried overhead, breaking the stillness, and Anna smiled faintly through her tears. "And now, after 10 years, we're standing here, on some island in the middle of nowhere. Life is strange." Keanu allowed himself a small, bittersweet smile. Life has a way of circling back to the things that matter. The sun dipped lower, bathing the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The world around them seemed to glow, as though urging them to embrace this fleeting moment of truth. Anna reached for his hand hesitantly, unsure if the gesture would be welcomed. To her surprise, Keanu didn't pull away. His fingers closed gently around hers, and for the first time in a decade, they stood together not as strangers, but as two souls who had finally stopped running from the past. The ocean roared, as if applauding their silence, and the island bore witness to a reunion that was less about answers and more about finally allowing the wounds to breathe. The old apartment building stood like a relic from another life, its faded brick walls streaked with grime, windows cracked and patched with tape. The air smelled of dust and mildew as Keanu, Hazel, and Detective Rodriguez stepped inside. The creaking floorboards echoed beneath their steps, as though the building itself remembered the lives once lived within it. Hazel clutched Keanu's hand, her eyes scanning the peeling paint and rusted mailboxes. "It feels so strange being back," she whispered. "Like the walls remember all the nights Mama cried here." Keanu squeezed her hand gently, his heart twisting. "We're not here for sorrow, Hazel. We're here for the truth." Detective Rodriguez, a tall man with graying hair and a presence that commanded quiet authority, led the way. His badge caught the faint light from the flickering hallway bulbs. "You're sure it's in the bedroom closet?" he asked. Hazel nodded. "I used to hide there whenever the landlord came by. I remember the loose board in the corner." They entered the apartment. Dust lay thick on the counters, cobwebs clinging to the corners. The room smelled stale, abandoned. Yet beneath it all was a strange familiarity, like a faded photograph of a place once called home. Hazel walked slowly toward the small bedroom, her steps hesitant but determined. She knelt by the closet, reaching to the back corner. Her fingers searched, then pressed against a section of the wood that shifted slightly. "Here," she said. Keanu knelt beside her, helping her pry the board loose. The wood gave way with a groan, revealing a small metal box wrapped in layers of tape and cloth. Hazel's eyes widened, her breath catching. "That's it," she whispered. Rodriguez crouched beside them, pulling gloves from his pocket. Carefully, he lifted the box free. The weight of it seemed to anchor the air, as though decades of secrets were contained within its battered metal shell. He placed it on the bed, pulling a small knife from his belt to slice through the tape. The sound of it tearing was like the unraveling of silence long kept. Inside lay stacks of papers, yellowed scripts with Lydia's handwriting across the margins. Contracts signed in Hale's name, with clauses altered in ink, and folders of payment records showing vast sums transferred to shell companies. Even emails, printed and saved, where Hale mocked Lydia's foolish belief that she could fight him. Rodriguez's eyes darkened as he sifted through the files. This is damning, enough to bury him if it reaches the right hands. Hazel stared at the papers, her chest swelling with both vindication and grief. Mama wasn't lying. She never lied. Keanu's fists clenched, the muscles in his jaw taut. No, she didn't. And now the world is going to know it. Rodriguez carefully repacked the box. "We'll take this straight to the station. Chain of custody matters. We can't give Hale's lawyers any chance to claim tampering." As they left the apartment, Hazel glanced back at the empty room one last time. For years, it had been a place of fear, of hunger, of hiding. Now, it felt like a grave being sealed, its ghosts laid to rest. But as they stepped into the street, a black SUV lingered at the corner, its tinted windows reflecting the dying light of the sun. Keanu noticed it first, his instinct sharpening. The vehicle idled for a moment too long before pulling away, disappearing into the traffic. Rodriguez narrowed his eyes. "He knows we're moving against him," he muttered. Keanu looked down at Hazel, her small face pale but resolute. He tightened his grip on her hand. "Then let him know. We're not afraid anymore." But deep down, he knew fear wasn't gone. It was only waiting, crouched in the shadows, where Victor Hale still thrived. The moment the first question was asked, Keanu leaned forward, calm but visibly resolute. Reporters pressed him about the controversy, about whether reopening old wounds would damage his career. He didn't deflect. He didn't retreat into polished statements. Instead, he spoke directly, voice steady, carrying a weight that silenced the room. This isn't about my career. It's about acknowledging mistakes, about rebuilding trust where it was broken, and about showing my son that silence in the face of truth is never strength. The line was replayed within minutes across every news outlet. His words hit with unusual gravity because they weren't designed for headlines. They were personal. From the first row, Ilara watched him, her expression torn between admiration and disbelief. She had never seen him so unguarded, willing to risk everything, not to protect himself, but to protect honesty. Then came the moment that shifted the atmosphere completely. A journalist from a European network stood up and asked whether Keanu regretted reappearing in Ilara's life at all, given the storm that followed. The room grew tense, cameras leaning closer. Keanu didn't hesitate. He looked directly at Ilara before answering. "No, I regret the years I stayed away, but never this moment. Never the chance to stand with her again, even if it costs me everything." That single declaration set the press room alight. Reporters whispered, some nodding, others scrambling to push their questions louder. Social media caught fire instantly. Clips of his words began circulating under hashtags that trended globally within hours. Never this moment and Keanu's truth. Ilara's hand trembled in her lap. For years she had carried the pain of abandonment, hidden it behind sharp words and cautious silence. Hearing him expose his heart so openly, without scripts, without safety nets, broke something inside her that had long been frozen. And then, unexpectedly, a ripple of applause rose in the press room. It began with one reporter, then another, until the room itself seemed to respond, not to celebrity, but to raw courage. Keanu didn't smile or bow. He simply lowered his eyes, humbly letting the sound pass over him. He had given everything he could, and for the first time in years, Ilara believed he might truly mean it. The courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Headlines already screamed across the nation. Hollywood mogul faces justice. Keanu Reeves at center of courtroom drama. The trial of Victor Hale had become a spectacle, drawing crowds not only for the scandal, but for the star who refused to stand aside. Keanu walked between Lydia and Hazel as they approached the doors. His hand rested gently on Hazel's shoulder, steadying her small frame against the chaos of shouted questions. Lydia clutched her purse to her chest, her pale face tight with both fear and resolve. Together, they looked like a fragile family. Yet every step toward those doors was an act of defiance against the man who had tried to break them. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Journalists filled the benches, their pens poised. Lawyers arranged their papers with brisk precision. At the front sat Victor Hale, his once pristine suit immaculate, his expression smug despite the charges that loomed over him. He leaned back in his chair as though he still believed himself untouchable, his eyes sweeping the room with disdain. When Lydia entered, his lips curved into a thin smile as if mocking her frailty. But she did not bow her head. She lifted her chin, walking past him with quiet dignity, Hazel clinging to her side. Keanu followed, his presence a shield. Hale's smirk faltered just slightly under Keanu's piercing gaze. The trial began with the presentation of evidence. Detective Rodriguez's voice carried firm authority as he displayed contracts, emails, and payment records. The jury leaned forward, their eyes widening as the scope of Hale's theft was revealed. Years of exploitation, millions stolen, lives ruined. all orchestrated by the man sitting smugly at the defense table. But the most powerful evidence wasn't paper, it was testimony. When Lydia was called to the stand, the room fell into hushed silence. Her voice trembled at first, recounting the early days of her career, the way Hale had praised her creativity, only to strip it from her piece by piece. She described the threats, the blacklist, the doors slammed in her face. With each word, the weight of her pain filled the room. At one point, her eyes glistened, her hand tightening around the edge of the witness box. He told me I was nothing without him, that no one would ever believe me, and for years I let that voice define me. But not anymore. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the judge's expression softened. Hale shifted in his seat, his smugness flickering. Then came Hazel. The bailiff guided her carefully to the stand, her small frame almost swallowed by the chair. The microphone seemed too large for her trembling hands. Keanu gave her an encouraging nod, his eyes shining with pride. Lydia pressed her hand to her lips, silently praying for her daughter's courage to hold. Hazel's voice quavered at first as she stated her name and age, but when asked why she was there, something inside her steadied. She lifted her chin, her voice clear despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Because he hurt my mama, because he took everything from us. We lost our home, we lost our hope. I watched my mama cry herself to sleep because of him. The jury shifted uncomfortably, several averting their eyes. Hazel's words cut sharper than any legal argument. She paused, her breath catching. Then she added, her voice firm and unwavering, "But he didn't break us. We still have love, and love is stronger than his lies." The room went utterly still. A moment later, a wave of quiet sobs and murmurs swept through the gallery. Even the hardened bailiff blinked back tears. Victor Hale's smug mask cracked, his jaw tightening as though her words had pierced deeper than any evidence could. The days following Keanu's heartfelt promise to Sophia were filled with cautious anticipation. The media frenzy had quieted slightly, but curiosity still lingered. People wanted to know if Keanu's words about rebuilding trust were genuine or just another passing Hollywood moment. Sophia, too, remained uncertain. Her heart wanted to believe him, yet her scars urged caution. Keanu didn't push. Instead, he began showing up in the small, meaningful ways that spoke louder than any declaration. When Sophia's nonprofit hosted a community cleanup, Keanu arrived in simple clothes, gloves on, trash bag in hand. He didn't make speeches or pose for cameras. He worked side by side with neighbors, unnoticed until whispers began to spread. Sophia saw him kneeling in the dirt, laughing with children, quietly restoring broken benches. She caught his eye once, and, in that fleeting look, the walls around her heart softened. One evening, Sophia received an anonymous delivery, a restored piano, nearly identical to the one she had played in their youth. Tucked beneath the lid was a handwritten note. "For the music you gave the world, and for the songs you never got to play." Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't just a gesture. It was memory, respect, and apology, wrapped together. But the most powerful moment came quietly. One stormy night, Sophia's car broke down on a deserted road outside the city. She hesitated to call anyone, but before panic set in, headlights appeared. Keanu stepped out of his Jeep, umbrella in hand, as if fate had guided him there. He didn't ask how or why. He simply offered her warmth, patience, and safety. Sophia sat in his car, listening to the rhythmic beat of rain, realizing that this wasn't a man chasing redemption for appearances. It was a man who, through countless small acts, was proving his sincerity. By the time they returned to the city, something between them had shifted. Trust, fragile yet unmistakable, was taking root. The storm had mirrored their journey, dark, uncertain, and unpredictable, but even storms pass. And as Sophia leaned her head against the window, quietly watching the city lights, she whispered the words Keanu had longed to hear, though barely audible. "Maybe we can try again." Keanu's chest tightened with relief. He didn't respond with words. He simply placed his hand over hers, knowing that sometimes silence carried more power than promises. The California sun streamed down on a modest community center, its once cracked walls newly painted a soft sky blue. A banner stretched across the entrance in bold letters, the Hazel Hope Foundation, opening day. People gathered on the lawn, families with children, volunteers, donors, and reporters who had once written scandalous headlines but now returned for something different. Once they learned that there was something different, they stayed. Keanu stood near the side of the stage, his familiar figure dressed simply in jeans and a blazer, nothing about him calling attention except the quiet gravity of his presence. Lydia stood beside him, healthier than she had been in years, her hand resting on the stroller where baby Elias babbled happily. Her hair, once dulled by exhaustion, now gleamed in the sun. She looked like herself again, a woman restored not only to health, but to dignity. Hazel adjusted the microphone at the podium, her hair tied back neatly, a white ribbon pinned in it. She was no longer the trembling 11-year-old clutching a cardboard sign in the cold. She was composed, confident, her eyes bright as she gazed at the crowd. Her voice rang clear as she began. "A year ago, I stood outside a studio, holding a piece of cardboard. It said, 'Please help my mama.' I was scared, and I thought we were alone in the world. But that sign led us here." The crowd listened intently. Parents wiped their eyes. Children leaned against their mothers' sides, their small faces reflecting curiosity and awe. Hazel continued, "That day, one person saw me. One person stopped to listen, and because of that kindness, my mama is alive. My baby brother is alive, and we are standing here today, opening a place that will give other families the same chance we were given." Her eyes flicked to Keanu, and for a moment her voice caught. But she pressed on, her chin lifting with strength. "The Hazel Hope Foundation will help mothers and children who have lost their homes, who are scared and hungry, who think no one will ever care. We will help them find shelter, food, medical care, and most of all, hope." The audience erupted into applause, but Hazel raised her hand gently, signaling she had more to say. She leaned into the microphone, her young voice carrying a wisdom far beyond her years. "If you ever see someone holding a sign asking for help, don't look away. You might be the miracle they've been waiting for." Silence followed for a heartbeat, heavy and full. Then applause swelled again, louder, surging through the crowd like a wave of unity. Tears streaked faces, hands clapped raw, and in that moment, it was clear that Hazel's words had touched something universal, the yearning to believe that kindness mattered. It seemed that kindness mattered. Behind her, Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth, overcome with pride. Keanu lowered his head, blinking back the emotion swelling in his chest. For all the scripts he had performed, for all the lines he had spoken on screen, nothing compared to the authenticity of Hazel's words. The ribbon was cut and the doors opened. Families stepped inside to see bright rooms filled with books, cribs, art supplies, and kitchens stocked with food. Volunteers guided them, explaining how the foundation would provide legal aid, counseling, and transitional housing. Keanu walked among them quietly, not seeking recognition. He helped a mother lift a stroller up the steps, held a toddler's hand as the child toddled through the doorway, smiled at a teenager who shyly asked for a photograph. To the families there, he wasn't the Hollywood star. He was simply the man who had listened when a little girl cried for help. Keanu stood at the edge of the stage, the weight of 10 years pressing against his chest like a storm that had finally broken. Yet for the first time there was no fear in him, only a calm, steady clarity. He looked at the audience. Not just as faces in the dark, but as souls connected by the same fragile thread of human experience. "We all carry regrets," he said, his voice softer now, no longer the actor or the star, but simply a man. We've all wished we could rewrite certain chapters, but maybe those chapters, as painful as they are, were needed to bring us to this moment, to remind us what truly matters. He turned slightly, eyes settling on Miranda. She didn't look away. Their shared history seemed to fold in on itself, not erased, but redefined. I spent years running from the past, he admitted, but tonight I've learned something. Healing doesn't come from pretending the pain never happened. Healing comes when we dare to face it and choose love anyway. A ripple of silence spread through the crowd. For a moment, the world held still. Cameras didn't matter, nor did the headlines that would flood the internet by morning. What mattered was this truth, spoken raw and unfiltered. Miranda's eyes glistened, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she placed her hand over her heart, a small gesture, yet powerful enough to reach him across the vast stage. Keanu's chest tightened. It was not reconciliation in the way people imagined, no fairy tale reunion, no sudden erasure of years lost, but it was acknowledgement, it was grace. He drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly. "If you've been listening tonight, I want you to remember this," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "Don't wait 10 years. Don't let silence or pride build walls that keep you from the people you love. Life is too short. Pick up the phone, knock on the door. Say the words you've been holding back." The crowd erupted in applause, not the thunderous roar of excitement, but the kind that rose from hearts stirred awake. People clapped with tears streaking their cheeks. Some reached for their partner's hands. Others pulled out their phones, no doubt already typing messages to those they had neglected. Keanu bowed his head slightly, humbled by the response. He hadn't planned this moment. He hadn't rehearsed these words. But perhaps that was why they mattered. They came from the truest place inside him. As he stepped back from the microphone, he felt lighter, as if some invisible chain had broken. The years of regret no longer defined him. Instead, he carried something far greater: the courage to forgive himself, and the hope that others would find the same strength. And as the lights dimmed, the message lingered in the air, an invitation not just for Miranda, but for everyone listening, to turn their own silence into reconciliation before it was too late.